Heads up? We're ready to go. Okay, I think that we're going to get started because it is 11:30 by my computer clock, and I want to honor the people who are in the room, and thank you so much for staying right to the very end. I know some of you do have long distances to travel to get home. My name is Dr. Janette Hughes, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology in Oshawa. And I'm at the Faculty of Education there, and I'm also the Canada Research Chair in Technology and Pedagogy. And so today in this talk, I'm going to spend about half the time talking about a project that we're working on with the Ministry of Education, and then I'm going to let you go out into the hallway to talk to my fabulous team of newly minted OCT teachers who've just graduated from our BEd program. Some of them are graduate students in our grad program as well. So they have set up tables outside, and they're going to be able to talk to the specifics of some of the things that I'm talking about in more general terms. So let's get started. I was going to introduce them, but I think they're all tied up out there. So you'll have to ask them their names when they come through. But they deserve as much of the spotlight as I do, because I couldn't do what I do without an incredible team behind me. So I know that you've probably seen this image a number of times. I've certainly seen it since I've been here several times in various presentations, and you'll recognize it as the graphic from the Ministry of Education's 21st Century Learning discussion paper, basically. And it's broken down into, they break those skills and competencies down into 6 categories. And I think since we're already 2 decades in to the century, I think we should have a contest and coin a new term for 21st century learning. I've tried digital age learning, but it hasn't caught on yet. But let me know if you can think of something. But really, these are competencies that we've always wanted our students to graduate with and to be successful in not just school, but in life and at work, whatever they choose to do. I want to make the argument that if you establish a maker culture in your school, and it doesn't have to be a maker space, because a maker space is actually about way more than the equipment and the tools that is housed in an environment. I like to liken it to, I used to be an English and drama teacher at the high school level, and I liken it to teaching dramatic arts. You don't have to have the theater, with the lights and the stage and the chairs to do good drama. You can do it anywhere, anytime. Same with making. But I really think that we can foster some of these 21st century skills that we're talking about through making in schools. I'm sure you all know by now about makerspaces and what they are. The Horizon report, which is put out every year, they have a higher education version and a K-12 version, and if you're not reading it, you really should take a look. Says makerspaces are places where anyone, regardless of age or experience, can exercise their ingenuity to construct tangible products. For this reason, many schools are seeing their potential to engage learners in hands-on learning activities. And furthermore, Halverson and Sheridan, who wrote a really nice piece, and if you're looking for an introductory sort of academic piece to get you started thinking about the culture of maker and maker pedagogies, this would be a piece to read, say that the growing number of people who are engaged in the creative production of artifacts in their daily lives and who find physical and digital forms to share their processes and products with others. So that is what the maker movement is, or the makerspace movement. And I mentioned the Horizon report, and I think it's really important as educators that we're aware of what is identified each year as technologies or emerging technologies on the horizon. And so every year, I said, they publish this report, and 2017 is not yet out. It is for higher ed, but not for K-12, so keep looking for that. But this graphic is from there, and you notice at the bottom, it says near term, which is 1 year or less. We should be seeing makerspaces and online learning happening on a regular basis in schools. How many of you have a makerspace already set up in your school? So a good number of people. And how many of you are thinking about going in that direction? Okay, so we're on trend then, right? And of course, I've noticed since I've been here since Tuesday, a lot of people talking about making, maker spaces. But I also want to draw your attention to the midterm and the far-term horizon. So we're looking at robotics and virtual reality, and I would add augmented reality to VR, because I think that there's actually more potential right now in education for augmented reality. And if you go out into the hallway after I finish talking and talk to Melanie, she is a graduate student who's doing her thesis on augmented and virtual reality in schools. She can tell you everything you ever wanted to know. And then in the far term, artificial intelligence and wearable technology. And these are two things that we're just starting to look at. The wearables we've been doing for a while, but the artificial intelligence is something we're just starting to dabble with now. You'll also notice along the, on your screen, it's on the left-hand side, the challenges that are identified each year. And wicked challenges are those challenges that are so difficult to even define, much less find a solution for. And you'll notice that the idea of personalizing learning is identified as a wicked challenge. But it's something that I want us to think about today, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. So I have a Maker Lab. It's called the STEAM 3D Maker Lab, and we focus on STEAM, not STEM, because we really think that the arts is important, but by arts we also mean the language arts, so it's literacy, but it's really, making is interdisciplinary and should be used in all subject areas. Because they really foster the kinds of mindsets or predispositions that students need, including, you know, inquiry and play, and design thinking and critical thinking and problem solving and all of these things that we've been talking about for the last 4 days here. But the idea of personalized learning, if we really want to walk the talk of personalizing learning, then I think that we should be redefining what we mean by project-based and problem-based learning and start thinking about passion-based or passion-driven learning, where the learning comes from the interest, is born out of the interests of the students. And I'll give you just an example that I've used in the past, but this is something that's very personal to me. I have a daughter who's in grade 10, and she's in a gifted program, but she's fascinated by all things related to Scandinavia. So, and she would include Iceland in that grouping of countries. She has taught herself some of the language, particularly focusing on Norwegian. She watches Norwegian shows and Swedish shows and Danish shows. She knows the geography. In her spare time, she sketches the maps, and she can draw them freehand and do a really beautiful, like you wouldn't be able to tell she didn't trace it. So here's this kid who loves something that is never going to be covered in the Ontario curriculum, because where do you see that happen in the Ontario curriculum? Now, she's privileged. She's got privilege, because she is the daughter of 2 professors. And so I took her to Scandinavia in March, and she was able to travel around and see the culture and experience the culture. But what about the kids who don't have that privilege? How do they explore their passions, if not at school? And so I think we really need to think about that. And even though it's difficult, even though it's identified as a wicked challenge, it's worth our time and our effort figuring out how we're going to make that happen. And I think that making is one area that might hold some potential or some promise to help us do that. Wouldn't it be lovely, and I'm not sure how easy that is for you to read, but wouldn't it be lovely if all of our graduates were able to say things like this? I learned by making things. I understand that things can get messy when you're tinkering. I create, not just consume, something that's really important in my lab, which focuses on the production side of things. I pause to document and reflect on my process. I'm comfortable not knowing. And wouldn't it be great if teachers would feel like that as well? So many people, so many teachers, so many schools, school districts are really embracing the maker movement, and we've seen that here. What we have is a really sort of pressing or current need to define best practices, and you're doing that. Those of you who said you're already playing with making in schools, you're already doing that. because we need to better understand how to utilize making for the purpose of learning. So one of my concerns is that you create a maker space, right? A place where everybody can go to do making. But in some schools I've visited, that space becomes the place that kids can go to when they've finished their real work, right? And so how is that going to be any different than the computer lab was, right? Or that station in the classroom where if you finish your work, you can go and play a game that is enrichment. Yes, it's educational, but it's not really connected to authentic learning. So what we're doing is, so that's where we come in. And as a researcher, it's something that I really want to get to the bottom of. So what are the best practices? What do we need to do? How do maker spaces work? Because, of course, this is fairly new. Not making. We've always been making in schools. And those of you who have taught in media literacy and art and even in science, we've been making for, since schooling began. But the maker movement, maker culture is just a little bit different, and we can talk about how. So in conjunction, in partnership with CODE, the Council of Ontario Directors of Education, and the Ministry of Ontario Education, we've sort of embarked on this project, and it's called Science 3D, Discover, Design, and Develop through Maker Spaces. And we are working with 20 schools from 20 different school districts. This year that just finished, we worked with 11 school boards. And in each of those school boards, they selected one school to be sort of their new kind of spotlight school. And they they basically selected 3 teachers from each of those schools. And we didn't put any prescription on how they should select. So some schools chose the teacher librarian and then someone from primary, someone from junior. Other schools just went with 3 people from 3 different divisions. Some people decided to make a divisional focus. So, the 4, 5, 6 group came. So we didn't put any sort of limitations, or we weren't prescriptive about that. And then what we did was we brought them down to Oshawa, to our lab, and we did 2 days of professional development with them. And we talked about maker culture, we talked about assessing maker, we talked about, we gave them hands-on sessions so they were able to actually physically use the tools and the equipment. And then we sent them back to their schools. We gave them a big, huge chunk of money, and we said, buy what you think you need. And they've done that, and now they're in the process of implementing these maker spaces. And I'm hesitant to say maker spaces because in some cases, the schools don't have a maker space. They're using classrooms, they're using center approaches, or they've got a place where they store the equipment, but they're not really making in there. They're actually making everywhere, and they're making in different corners, places that weren't, prior to this project, learning spaces have become learning spaces, little nooks and crannies in the school. So I wanted to share with you some of the work that we've been doing in this project. And these are the first 11 boards that we've been working with. There are 9 new boards coming on for next year, for year 2. And I won't announce who those are because I know the directors are currently being contacted. So no spoilers there. But I want to show you, this is a little segment we just filmed for fun. We didn't realize we'd ever be using it. But this was sort of highlights from our PD sessions in Oshawa in the fall of last year. So that was just a little taste of those 2 days. So it was a very busy time and very exciting, and the teachers left very inspired to get going. But we ran into some snags. And one of the things that we've learned to do differently this year is it took forever for them to get the equipment that they wanted. And I know that there's so much red tape when schools need to order something. I can go to Best Buy and pull it off the shelf and go to the cash. You can't do that in your schools. So this year we're sending them home with a package of like a sort of a basic toolkit that they can get started with right away, because some of the schools lost momentum. But these were the things you saw in the video, not all of them, but these are the things that we do with the students and the teachers that we work with. And the picture that you see there is our pancake bot. So it prints 3D pancakes, so actually more 2D, but the students actually design the pancakes using a program similar to Tinkercad with a regular 3D printer, but then they put their SD card with their design into the pancake bot, and they can print their pancake. We do a lot of work outside of the ministry project. We do a lot of work with at-risk students, and it's really just nice for them to come and have breakfast with us before we get started for the day. So you probably remember that the title of this talk was Make and Tell, and then with a focus on connecting, reflecting, and sharing. So we talked at the very beginning about those 21st century skills and competencies, but I want to just zero in on 3 that I think are really key in terms of making. And the first one is connecting. So these are some of the things that we've noticed over the course of this last year during this project, that making really facilitates the kind of collaboration we want our students to do. And that's not just peer-to-peer collaboration and learning, but it's putting their making out there for the world. And that's sort of one of the differences between making now and making, when I was in school doing, home ec, or, the boys, because we weren't allowed to take shop, creating their birdhouses. Everybody had to do the same thing, right? Okay, this week we're all making a book bag, or we're all making the birdhouse. As opposed to letting them drive the inquiry or the decision making. We've also seen a lot of collaboration with multi-age groupings in the project. So, the whole idea of reading buddies is being redefined and repackaged to sort of tech buddies. So you have, and sometimes it's the younger students teaching the older students, which I really like. And then, of course, there's the sort of community sharing, and there are a lot of maker fairs popping up. And in fact, part of the project for us is that every school has to sort of scale up and share with at least their board, what they're doing, because the hope is that this will scale up not just at the school level, but at the board level for each of these boards as well. And then, of course, bringing in guest makers. And a lot of people are already doing this, Skyping people in, but actually bringing people into the school and having them make with the students. And a lot of the parents are really interested in coming in and doing that kind of thing. So lots of involvement. I also want to talk about connecting in terms of the curriculum. And I will tell you that the question I get asked most often about this project is, I know my students are doing really rich, deep learning. I see it happening. But how do I connect it to the curriculum? And, there are curriculum connections, and if you go out and talk to the ladies, I've asked them to focus on that, because that is the biggest question we get asked. So you can talk to them about that and what they do. But this idea of it being interdisciplinary, I think you probably have heard Finland has decided that they're not doing subjects anymore, right? This is very revolutionary. And when I was visiting Scandinavia in March, I got to see some schools, I got to visit some schools and see this kind of thing in action, where learning happens around a theme as opposed to a subject. And time and space has been rethought. So you've got schools where on a Monday, 5 hours is devoted to one subject so that they can really get in there and do that kind of deep critical work, as opposed to in our secondary schools where students go to 4 classes a day for 76 minutes and just start to get into whatever they're doing and then have to pack it up and put it away. So we need to, if we're going to have innovation, we need to really think about innovation, not just trying to fit the square peg into the round hole. Like, let's really bust it apart and think about how we can start again from scratch. Melanie Mulcaster is a student in our graduate program, and I'm supervising her work, her project, and she's done her project on making in her school. She's a teacher librarian. If you're not following the Mulk, and her handle is there, at the Mulk, _ the Mulk, you should be, because she's doing some really innovative, creative things in her school. And one of the things that she did this year was she had the students involved in the Forest of Reading. You're probably familiar with the program, but she connected all of the books that they read with various different maker activities in the library. And then I want to talk about real-world connections. We visited a school, my team and I, last week in Durham Catholic. Anybody from Durham Catholic here? Ooh. Okay, so in Durham Catholic, an elementary school in Uxbridge. And we were just there to talk to the teachers, but this one teacher said, "You've got to come down. My students really, really want to share with you what they're doing." So we all trundled down the hall to the grade 1 classroom. And she had designed sort of 3 challenges for them, and they were real-world challenges. The first one was design a way to communicate an understanding of fractions to somebody who's visually impaired. The second, which is the first one, it's hard to read there. The second one is compose a piece of music that will soothe a person with dementia who often gets agitated. And the inspiration about this came from the teacher's own mother, who was struggling with dementia. And then a science connection was build a house in a forested area by a ravine which does not disturb the wild plants and animals that live there. And this area is in Toronto, so of course then space is limited. These students were so proud of what they did, and they were so engaged. This is a group that did the science challenge. The group that designed a space for somebody with dementia, and they'd really thought this through, so they had everything, and they could explain when we asked them, well, why do you have this? And they would tell us. And then the group that actually wrote their own songs and played them and recorded them, and then played them for us. So this kind of real world, and then the sharing piece of it as well. And this principal tweets everything out. I don't think I've ever met a principal who tweets so much. The second thing I want to talk about is the importance of reflection. And without reflection, there really is no learning. And the idea of reflective documentation. And Melanie Mulcaster, who I just mentioned, she, in her master's work, has really focused in on the idea of pedagogical documentation. And so she's using that in her makerspace. So what she talks about is trying to figure out the documentation methods. So you can use photos or blogs or podcasts or videos or notes or sketches or whatever works for you. And the things that you want to document for yourselves are your lessons, your activities, any projects the students are working on, the community events that you run. Document all of this kind of thing and see what works. Because that's part of this. I talk about the 3 M's. Monitoring everything, maintaining everything, and then measuring. What you're doing effective? And then, is your focus subject content? Is it student engagement? Or is it meaning making? What is the focus? And then that helps you determine what it is you want to measure. And then, of course, reflecting on why you chose to document those specific aspects of the making. What motivates a principal to take that picture and tweet that picture out? So reflecting on those kinds of things. And then how does your documentation answer the question that you've asked yourself? And then, of course, once you are doing your own documentation, get your students to do the documentation as well and share that with you. My master's students, some of them are here, took a critical making course with me, so they know this firsthand. Having to document everything that they did, and even putting it into a story, a little video clip or something, storying the learning. And this is a really nice illustration that Jackie Gerstein posted, and I love this quote by John Dewey. He was way ahead of his time, this man. "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." So that really important element. And then in one school, this was a school in Renfrew County we went to visit. Anybody from Renfrew County here? No, so we'll have to tweet this out to let them know that I gave them a shout out. So this was a teacher, grade 1 teacher, who decided to use maker journals. So she created maker journals, and she was sort of implementing kind of like a maker hour or genius hour in her classroom, but she calls it STEAM Station. So periodically students would do STEAM Station, and she would have various different things set up. And in this particular case, Cameron was working on green screen, and he was writing about and reflecting on his learning on green screen. And then finally, sharing. And we talked a little bit about sharing already. If any of you saw Jennifer Casatodd's talk yesterday, Jennifer is also one of my graduate students. If she didn't convince you that you should be tweeting and using social media, then I won't be able to convince you, because she's the most passionate person I know about this. But get it out there, right? Whether it's Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Share the events that are happening in your school. Share the learning with each other, that kind of professional development. One of the things that we're noticing in the ministry project is that teachers who are maybe a little bit reluctant to jump into the maker movement are starting to become interested, and that's how it happens, right? They see good things happening in classrooms, and they sort of stick their heads in and think, oh, well, there's a lot of excitement around this. And they start asking questions. And what they're doing is, this is how it's scaling up in the schools. They're saying, could you come into my class and help me with that? And that's how it happens, right? That's how the movement is born. I just want to touch very quickly, let me check my time, very quickly on some other considerations that I think are really important. And I won't spend a lot of time on this. But there are a number of tensions that come with bringing an informal learning approach, like making, into a formal learning situation, like formal schooling. And I mentioned one of those already, and that's if the maker culture is about letting students be autonomous and letting them make decisions about what they want to study and how they want to express their learning, then we purposely direct them by being very rigid about which curriculum expectations we're going to hit right now, then really isn't that sort of antithetical to the maker culture? So that's a tension that we need to sort of figure out and solve. The other thing is the equity piece. Leah Buckley's a researcher who used to work at, she got her start at MIT, but she does a lot of work in the area of e-textiles, and she really focused on e-textiles because she wanted to find a way to bring more women into the maker movement. And that's not to say that only girls like to sew, but it was just sort of a way to help some women or girls find their place. But she just sort of did a breakdown of making and how that looks, and it was really quite disconcerting. She looked at Make magazine, for example, which was founded by Dale Doherty, who's sort of the father of the maker movement, the modern maker movement at least, and found that 85% of all of the authors and 85% of all the people featured in Make magazine were white men. And so we really need to think about how can we create more inclusive maker spaces. And by inclusive, I don't just mean cultural diversity. I mean also how do we make making accessible for students who don't necessarily have the means to do it and are at schools where parent councils can't raise the money to afford the equipment. So those are important considerations. And of course, financially, you know how expensive some of these things are. And I can say these schools are doing great things in my project because we gave them a whack of money. But we've got a new project, and the focus of the new project for next year is how do you create a makerspace on a very limited budget, and using upcycling, recycling, and then moving away from the kit. The kit that's really expensive because you can go and buy LEDs and sell batteries at the dollar store for much less than you can buy a Chippytronics kit for, from a distributor. So we need to find ways of making it more affordable. So we talk about sustainability in two ways. The financial sustainability to keep things moving once you've established a makerspace, but we also talk about environmental sustainability and how do we move beyond printing out plastic, a whole bunch of plastic that's just going to end up in a website, because that's the first thing they want to do, right? I have a rule in my lab, we don't print anything unless it's something that is original, that's something someone created or adapted. So if you just pull it down off Thingiverse, we're not printing it for you. There's got to be learning involved there. And what is the purpose? We get kids and teachers to think about the purpose of what it is they're printing. Because the promise of 3D printing was actually, well, then we can just print things as we need them. Maybe to sustain the life of a product like a watering can that's lost the end of its spout. We can just print that instead of throwing the whole thing away and buying a new one. But that's not what has happened. So we need to really be conscious of environmental concerns as well. So I'm going to stop because I really want you to spend some time with the ladies outside. They're brilliant, and they can answer any of your questions. And so do please, before you head off on your long drives, just stop and say hello, because they've worked hard to put this together for you. Thank you so much for coming. It's my contact information if anybody wants to be in touch. And we also have brochures and things out there if you want to grab one of those that has contact information on it as well.